Hello and welcome to a new and exciting season of Something Rotten. We've been talking about it for as long as we've been doing the podcast, and Blake has finally worn me down. We are doing a season on The Last of Us Part 2. Blake, how does it feel to be so victorious?
Well, it felt great until I realized we're doing a season on The Last of Us Part 2, and we like to put our emails out there, and I really fear for my future in terms of listener commentary and feedback.
Look, everyone just be cool. I think that's our general rule for the show.
Historically, Last of Us fans, normal, chill, and cool about everything.
That's right. We're all going to be super cool about all of this. But we're doing 4 episodes on The Last of Us Part 2, which is more than we have ever done on a single game, except for Max Payne 3.
Is that true?
Yeah, we did 5 on Max Payne 3. A game that deserves it fully. But this is not one of those. Instead, this is going to be kind of a preliminary introduction, ground-setting episode on The Last of Us Part 1, as it is now known. And to join us, we have a very talented writer and journalist, but also, fascinatingly, someone who avoided the game almost entirely until last year. Nicole Carpenter from Polygon is here. Hi, Nicole.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I know this is a very unique experience.
Genuinely, for someone who is as involved in like the game space as you might be completely unique in not only having not played it, but like not known any of the spoilers, which is like the real incredible thing.
Yeah. And when I say I don't know the spoilers, like I knew that Ellie lived, you know, like I knew that was going to happen, and that Joel did too, like because I knew the second game, so I like knew those things. But that was it. I didn't know. Yeah. I just like wasn't in. I didn't have a PlayStation for a very, very long time, so I just didn't know. My sister-in-law, who doesn't play video games, played this game before.
Oh shit.
And do you know, did she come to it because of one of the things that we'll probably talk about is The Last of Us has this like monumental reputation. It's like this is more than other games. Was she kind of told by someone like you gotta play this?
Yeah, it was like, this is more than just like a video game. This is like the best story ever told in games. So she's like, okay, well, like there's a PlayStation in my house, so I guess we'll give it a go.
Did you, even if you didn't know the story, did you feel like you were playing it for the first time with all the baggage of, like, the hyperbole? Either way, people feel good or bad about this game. Or did you feel free even from, like, that side of the reputation?
I definitely knew about the discourse. I knew... So my experience going in was basically, like, that this was going to be, like, a patronizing dad scenario. Like, that this is what the game was going to be. And so I was aware of the discourse. I knew that it was a polarizing game. But I didn't have any like inclination like whether I was going to like it or not. Because I really just like, you know, I knew it was a zombie game. Like I'm not totally into zombie games. So I was like, I'm not sure. But yeah, that was what I knew going in, was like, all right, a sad, patronizing dad. We got some zombies, and we've got a teenage girl.
Can we set the precedent right now? Or not set the precedent. Can we establish a rule going forward for this season, Jacob?
Yes,
and Nicole,
absolutely.
Nicole, by all means, weigh in. Are we calling them zombies or clickers? Because I'm on the side that they are zombies, but I think canonically they're insistent they aren't.
No, well, clickers, Blake, you see, are only one stage of the evolution.
I forgot the
biology.
creatures.
So they're actually called. I was reading. We will reference this chapter several more times, but I was reading Cameron Kunzelman's chapter on this, and he mentioned in like a footnote, he was like, this is the full. They're known as like these different things. Infected is the
I guess what I'm wondering though,
and then
are we categorizing them as zombies or not? Because I think we should just say yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, we're not Days Gone. We're not going to call them freakers. We're not going to call them whatever else.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
In Days Gone, they are known as freakers.
If we were really committed to the Something Rotten thesis statement, we would do a Days Gone season, but it might break this show apart.
We are not that committed. So, Nicole, you wrote a review of The Last of Us Part 1, which was the third release of The Last of Us game, because you had The Last of Us and then remastered and then Part 1. You wrote that last year on Polygon. People can go read that. I think one of the interesting things you said there was that you were aware of the discourse, and like the fascinating thing about this game is that like I could take that in 12 different, it's like the number of discourses about this are never ending. You know, you have the kind of the game design discourse, you have the dad discourse, the other kind of gender perspective discourse, you have the race perspective, which is something that was not talked about almost at all in the first like 4 or 5 years of this game's release, and has recently become much more poignant and written about. And so it's just kind of like one of the hard things of talking about this game is just kind of like I don't even want to say influence on the games industry, but just influence on kind of like how people have been talking and interacting with games for the past 10 years is hard to overstate and really complicated when you get into all of the different aspects.
It's weird. Like I think in some ways when The Last of Us hit, it left this crater that was like, okay, this is the path forward for games going forward. And it felt like other publishers adopted that briefly, and then every game just became Destiny instead because Destiny sold better than The Last of Us. But I think 10 years removed, if we look at it from a game industry perspective, this was the path for Sony moving forward, which I find like really fascinating in games that like super don't need to be this. Like Days Gone could have just been like a campy action game and instead wanted to be this like gritty thing. And like, say we will about Neil Druckmann's writing, I think compared to other game writers, he is clearly a league better in the AAA space. That I think is like one of the unfortunate downsides of the like way this game landed is like the B-rate versions of it that has come out. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think it has something that we'll get into is like, yeah, this is just for the past 10 years. This has kind of been what a AAA game looks like, at least when you see those Sony press conferences. And really, it is kind of the, to use their terminology, the quadruple A video game looks like, because Nicole, I think as you reported on, like this was one of those things where it's like these games cost $200 million is like something that came out of the whole Microsoft thing, which is even compared to where we were 10 years ago, just feels mind-meltingly expensive.
Yeah, 200 million is a ton right now, and 10 years ago, it's like you didn't see a game that was being made for that much. Like that's nuts.
One thing I'm curious about, Nicole, is like, I for Game Informer, I reviewed The Last of Us Part 1, but I came to it with all the baggage of having played it when I was like 19, and like, you know, it'd been one of my favorite games for so long, but then I had to like wade through the discourse, and by the time I revisited it improper for the remake, like I ultimately wrote a pretty negative piece about it. And like, you seem to be on the complete opposite side of that, and so I'm curious to know, like, what was it about it that hit so hard for you?
Yeah, I think that one of the really special things about this game and coming to it at this point where games are so long now, and games like there aren't such, I don't come across so many like very linear stories in the type of games that I'm playing. So coming to The Last of Us Part 1, it was such a focused story. It had that one path, and you take that one path, you don't stray off that path, and so that it was so focused, and that like it was a short contained experience, like felt really different to me. It was so different than any of the, than most of the other games that I was playing, and I think that the industry has moved so far away from that playing it last year was like, oh, okay, this feels fresh now to me. Like this felt like a fresh experience.
And that is especially interesting in the context of Part 2, which is a game that, when it first came out, one of the things people were talking about was like, oh my god, this game is long.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot believe how long I have
It's
been
interesting
playing
hearing
this
you say that, because I feel like my cynicism aside, it's like I'm playing Exoprimal right now, and I'm weighing whether or not it's like I'll play that game for 2 hours and forget it exists, or be like, do I play this for 70 hours? But it's like, it's weird when those,
Right.
like, even when I don't really care for a Sony, like, first-party game, they always do feel like a breath of fresh air, because it's like, well, at least I only have to play this for like 10 to 12 hours. Now they're kind of ballooning up Ragnarok. I think I played for 30. But you know what I mean? It's like, they at least, I don't have to weigh if I'm going to play the next Spider-Man for 100 hours like Fortnite. You know? Like, I do appreciate that.
Yeah, so one of the things, Blake, that you brought up that I had kind of forgot, but was like a major point when it came out, is that this came out the same year as BioShock Infinite, which was another game that I was really looking forward to. It was another, like, I mean, when I think about me in 2012 being excited for these things, it's like, it's hard to overstate how excited I was for BioShock Infinite. There has been a lot of discourse about that game as well, though really when it came out, and I think what's kind of interesting, and Blake, what you just, messaged me the other day, is like, over the past 5 years, people haven't talked about Infinite that much. Like, when you're talking about like game design trends, it doesn't feel like the linear story-based first-person shooter. Nicole said you were it felt like Last of Us was a breath of fresh air, but it's like, I can't think of another like completely story-centric linear first-person shooter since like Wolfenstein. Like, they are really not making those anymore. And so it is weird that like, of these two titans that came out in that year, The Last of Us seems to have kind of come out on top in terms of cultural
I wonder
legacy.
if it's because, like, if you like chart the narrative games up to when The Last of Us lands, like 2013 is a pretty crazy year, because like Tomb Raider came out that year, which was like way more narrative focused. Infinite, Last of Us, also Grand Theft Auto 5, which now is like firmly remembered for its online, but at the time people were like pretty fucking gaga over that game's story. Say what you will about it.
Yeah.
People loved that game's story, and it felt like,
yeah, it turns out Grand Theft Auto 5 did well.
but it had a very different cultural reception at that point, because the online did not ship with the game, and then when it did, it was like bungled to hell. But anyway, you could kind of look at that year almost as like, and I say this in big quotes, like the year games became art, right? Because it was like the year where everyone looked at
poor
right.
Roger Ebert.
But
Can you believe
it was the year people were looking at games like Infinite and The Last of Us specifically outside of our space, being like, what the hell? What's happening out there? It was like this big watershed moment for like taking games more seriously as like cultural not cultural artifacts, like pieces of art and culture. And I think the reason maybe Infinite has fallen away in a way that Last of Us has not, and now games like the God of War reboot, is they are more directly relatable to TV and film than a first-person shooter game. You can consume them in a more passive way as like a normal viewer. Like I struggle to think like if my mom, for example, would enjoy watching me play a first-person shooter the way she would The Last of Us, because it is just more directly related to like filmic language. And I think that is why it is like, for many reasons. I think it also has a better story than Infinite, to be fair. I think like that.
Infinite, we were talking about the race stuff right away. Like, that didn't take 5 years.
But I do think that is one of the reasons why The Last of Us has carried on, and just games of that ilk have remained so prominent, at least for certain publishers. It's just like, people can watch them like a movie in the way they just can't other games. Like text adventures and visual novels also have amazing stories. I don't want to watch one. Like, I at least need to be pressing the button to flip those pages. I can watch The Last of Us Part 2 on YouTube and get like a similar-ish experience. I think that's like something I've been thinking about recently.
Nicole, have you watched the Last of Us TV show?
I have, yeah. I've watched it. Before I go to the TV show, I would say my husband watched me play The Last of Us Part 1. He also hadn't played the game before. So, he was experiencing it like as you would a TV show, and he was really invested in the story. Like, it was like one of our TV shows. Like, I didn't play it if he wasn't there to watch it with me.
I want to hear your thoughts on the TV show. My broad take, which I've already talked about in a video, is essentially like The Last of Us is a game that is so clearly aping the language of prestige TV already that for a TV show to then be made out of this game feels almost redundant. You know, that it was just kind of like, well, of course this works as a TV show. The video game is very close in like a lot of the things it's doing to how the structure works. But did you enjoy it? Did you have, feelings on its, comparison to the game, changes, whatever?
Yeah, I ultimately liked the show. But I think that, like, I thought the acting was really, really good. I liked that a lot. I loved I think it was the third episode.
The Bill
third
and Ted
episode
one.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, we watched their excellent adventure through marriage.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill and someone.
Yeah, I don't know.
Bill and
Frank.
Yeah. But yeah, I liked it, but I think I liked the game much better because you spend so much time with them, that when you're watching the TV show, it felt sped up. Like, it felt like the relationship developed too fast. All of the relationships developed too fast, I think, except for the Bill and Frank one, because they spent the whole episode, going through their entire life. Whereas this, like, road trip over the past couple episodes, like, you expect more development time there. And so that was the part that stuck out to me as like much worse than the game, because those stories just happened way too fast. Actually, the one episode I didn't watch was the one with the cannibal cult, and I just don't know why. I didn't
interesting.
Watch it.
Yeah,
I just didn't watch it that week. So I've never seen that one.
That episode in particular is very strange because like a lot of the show, it is almost word for word and shot for shot the game, but then they also, and it's who knows why artistic decisions are made, they make the boss fight at the end where Ellie is fighting David, the cannibal guy, like much more explicitly sexual assault, which is certainly an implication in the game, but is not like as spelled out. And it was one of the more like surprising departures from it, because I assumed when making the game they kind of weighed how much they wanted to make that explicit versus not. And so an interesting and kind of strange episode. But I agree in terms of the character development stuff, and it's even like in the last episode they do that thing where Joel calls Ellie over to like help him with the ladder, and Joel is like distracted, or Ellie is distracted and doesn't respond. And it's like, well, that doesn't really, just like one-to-oneing that from game to screen doesn't really work, because like in the game, that you press triangle and Ellie comes over and helps you, and then that's significant because you press triangle and Ellie does nothing. And in this, it's just kind of a moment in the script. And so it definitely felt like there were times where they were attempting to do the same things that the games did, but they had like the language was much more limited in terms of like their television medium.
Yeah, and I think that when I watched that last episode, I like didn't, you couldn't even feel that traumatic episode happened. Like, it didn't, there wasn't like the weight there of what happened to her. I could have just watched, like, it felt like a, complete series without that episode. And I think that stuck out to me because what happens in that previous episode is so traumatic. It was shocking to me that it didn't have more of an impact.
The TV show is
episode.
weird, I think. One, because it proved in some ways The Last of Us was aping TV very hard. It was like, oh, they could just like pull some of these shots directly. I only watched like 2 or 3 episodes of it, and I think it's because I'd played the game enough times that I knew it, front and back. I didn't really need to see where the story was going to go. I also think, in large part, like, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann might say otherwise. I don't think the show was made for us who have played the game before. I think they largely didn't care about us. I will say the things I found really interesting about it, and I do would love, I don't know if I would love this, but I would be interested in this, is like a spin-off. And they've said this about the games before too. Spin-offs that explore that world outside of Joel and Ellie. Because all the moments in Jakarta, the extended opening with Joel's daughter, whose name is Sarah, and then the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, as Jacob called it earlier, the Bill and Frank episode, of those 3 episodes I watched, that was all the stuff I was very into, because it could kind of remove the breakneck pace that story needed to fit that entire game into 6 to 8 episodes, which feels insane that they didn't just add a few more to get kind of a slower pace in there. But ultimately, I had to bounce off it. I just was I can't do this story again. And also, I don't think this show is made for me. So I think I can sit out and it not be a big deal. But, Jacob, there's something I noticed about you.
Oh, yeah?
You're a very hairy guy. Probably shave pretty frequently. And yet you're not bankrupting yourself on disposable razor cartridges. What gives?
Blake, you are so right. If I shaved with one of those new multi-blade things, or even worse, had one of those subscription services, I'd take probably most of my income keeping my beard in check. But, in fact, I shave with a sponsor of this episode, Henson Razors, and they are genuinely very cool. See, Henson sells a classic safety razor that uses standard blades. Standard razor blades, unlike cartridges, are super cheap and not tied to any proprietary system. Even better, though, is that Henson's razor is designed to be super usable for anyone, no experience required. I had no cuts and smooth cheeks the very first time I shaved with it. It's a classic kind of razor, but engineered with super modern tech. It's the pinnacle of razor evolution, Blake. HensonShaving.com, promo code ROTTEN.
Can I tell you something about me, Jacob? I have not used a razor since I was a teenager.
Is that true?
I use an electric razor. I'm just really good at using those. Yeah, that's all I use.
Blake, here's the thing. I actually use this all of the time. This is a sponsor that I truly believe in. My beard, it looks full, but it just grows this fast. The thing is, you can get a razor and a free pack of 100 blades, which would last, years. You can do that all by going to HensonShaving.com and using the promo code ROTTEN. Blake, we all know December is the best month to give gifts.
All right, Hotshot, what you getting me then?
The warm glow of friendship?
You made me play anatomy. There's no glow left. This is a dying star. Whatever this is, it's done, Jacob.
Okay, how about a lifetime Nebula membership?
Wait, really? A lifetime? That's 45 years. At the clip I'm going.
Nebula has brought back lifetime memberships for the month of December, and now you can also give them to other people. The link is slightly different for this. It's in the show's description. But imagine it's the day before Christmas or the day before Hanukkah. I don't know when Hanukkah is.
What?
You don't have a gift. Hanukkah is a different date every year, Blake. Imagine that you scramble, but then you buy your loved one a lifetime Nebula membership. Imagine the smile on their face when you tell them they can listen to every episode of Something Rotten early, with tons of bonus episodes and no ads for their whole life.
Now it just feels like you're being sarcastic.
Blake, imagine the affection you'll be showered with when you tell them that they can watch exclusive videos from their favorite Nebula creators like me, Leo Vader, Patrick Willems, Philosophy Tube, and more.
You including yourself in that list?
Yep.
You don't know who I hang out with. I'm just going to buy a Nebula subscription for myself. I don't feel like you're being serious with me right now, Jacob Glynn.
You can do that too. It's $250 for a month, or you could treat yourself to a lifetime subscription.
Okay. What are you actually getting me?
Smile? Yeah, but it was, I was truly shocked at how popular it was, how successful it was now, because second time we're referencing him in the first episode, Cameron Kunzelman wrote a very good piece for Polygon on how The Last of Us became, in big quotes, the greatest story ever told in a game, which was kind of tracing all of the factors in 2013 that led up to The Last of Us being the thing that it was, And part of it was he was talking about like prestige TV at that time, and how popular zombies were. Like The Walking Dead was the most watched and talked about show on television and whatever. And it was like there were a number of things in 2013 that really seemed to like coincide to make this such a big deal. And so it just being able to do it again in like 2023, you can certainly talk about the post-pandemic world being more receptive, I guess, to a story about a global pandemic. I almost thought that would make it less appealing, but people like that. But it was wild to see basically all of the non-gamers in my life go through the same conversations I have and have almost identical discourse to like when the game came out, about like, was Joel right? Like, were these things that I kind of assumed as a gamer, I kind of rolled my eyes when people were still talking about that, because I was like, man, we've been relitigating that for 10 years. Just it came out fresh into a whole new
when that
culture.
First episode or the last episode went live, like an hour afterwards, my group chat with the knuckleheads from back home lit up, and they were like, man, what the hell? What was up with that ending? And I had flashbacks to 2013. I was like, Johnny, listen, I gotta explain this ending to you. It's really smart. But it was a whole like, I don't know, man. Like, it just ended so abruptly. And I was like, I'm doing it all over again.
In the theme of rushed story development, I think the end of the game is like better written than the end of the show. They're very close, but there are like lines that Ellie says in the game that she doesn't say in the show that I like immediately after I watched the whole TV show with my partner who had not played the game, and immediately after finishing it I was like, look at this, and I just pulled up the ending of the game, and she was like, that hit better. There's some stuff, even though I think, as you said, Nicole, the acting is great. I think Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal do a great job. But it's like, there is some juice in the ending of the game that is, I think, the most interesting part of the whole story is where that ends. And I think the TV show just like did not quite nail it in the way that the game does.
Do you think it's because of the weight of you being Joel, like you shooting those people? It's like it felt like so much more heavy because, like, all right, this is shitty, this is bad.
I mean, one of the like mechanical things about that is like it robs you of choice, which I think is like it's for as much as it apes film and TV cannot rob you of choice because you're controlling Joel, but ultimately he is like in the world, has his own brain and actions. And I think that does make that hit way harder than if I watch Pedro Pascal do it. And it's like, there's that like separation that I think TV and film, radio, book, whatever, just cannot fill in the same way games can. So I totally agree with you, Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, and the end is one of the two sections in the game where you do explicitly control Ellie. That is another change is at the end, and so it is the kind of like playing as her, realizing that she's finding distance from Joel. But there are also, I mean, they're just like, it is really a writing thing for me where like Ellie just has a line in the game where she's like, she essentially says like, I've been waiting for my turn, which I think makes what I guess is maybe didn't come through for me as much in the show is just like, it needs to be really clear what Ellie would have chosen in that moment for the kind of betrayal to read as a betrayal. And I think that people, and I've had 10 years to think about it, so maybe it's just like that plot point is more obvious to me than when I immediately finished the game. But like, I think that needs to be really clear, and it is obviously integral to the plot of The Last of Us Part 2 that she would have done that. And the TV show, the ending is just doesn't, I don't think you end it being like Ellie wanted to die in the same way that you do end the game, and that's that's everything. That's what it's all about.
I think skipped over in conversations about the ending of The Last of Us, though, is for how totemic and great of a moment it is. It is like a shot-for-shot copy of The Road. Like, down to that line is, like, basically, like, the road ends with this huge moment of the kid looking at someone and be like, okay. And it has a completely different context and meaning in that film, and it's a more positive ending. But it is more or less a copy of that exact same ending with, even though the meaning behind it is different, a, like, huge narrative fucking gut punch. Where this
is like a child saying, that okay.
Close up here of a kid going, okay. It's fucking the exact same thing.
I mean, so when the game came out, one of the things that was really exciting to me was people referencing the road as like a, you know, because as I spent a lot of my kind of early teens fighting to be like, video games are art, pay attention to them, you know, like they're worth talking about and whatever. And so being able to be like, hey, the people who made this game are referencing Cormac McCarthy was like very exciting for me to be like, this is real art, like, as you know, in the way that you said, it was like the year that games became art, because and this is, I think, the, you know, the expensiveness of this paired with its literary ambitions are kind of what makes it, because obviously there had been lots of smaller independent titles, whatever, before this that had been doing all sorts of interesting story stuff, but it is like it's the money and the good writing.
I think it's actually that first thing. I think games were literary for decades before this. It's just that their fans weren't literary before this. Well, that's reductive, but you know what I mean. In broad strokes, the audience wasn't as literary. I think The Last of Us stands out in that way, and why the like literary influences are more apparent is because it broke beyond the immediate audience to people maybe with more literary backgrounds, you might say, than the average gamer. But I think it's more the money and the prestige rather than like it being a super unique case, because it's hard to like look at. Granted, I haven't played them, but Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, something like Last of Us Part 2 and not see its, like, deeper narrative ambitions. Sorry, Silent Hill 2.
You said Last of Us Part 2?
So, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, sorry. I meant Silent Hill 2, that one that comes out to me.
Nicole, I know you played it late, but, like, do you remember where kind of, as a gamer, you were in 2013? Like, what were your kind of... Were you thinking about video games as pieces of art? Were they just fun little digital toys that you liked? You know, like where were you when the industry was kind of having these conversations?
So let's see, that was 10 years ago. I mostly played Halo.
Hell
yeah.
The pinnacle of art.
Yeah, the pinnacle of art. Yeah, I mostly played multiplayer, like Halo multiplayer. So I appreciated games. I played other games occasionally, but the game that I was most focused on was Halo. What would I have been? 10 years ago, I would be 24. So I would have been just deciding to go back to college, and it was when I was in college at like 26 or so where I started to be like, oh, I can treat video games as text to analyze like I am doing with books. So I would say before that I was just like, at the point in my video game experience, I was like, I'm going to be very good at Halo, and I'm going to go into tournaments, and that was my goal.
That's rad. Did you? Yeah. You played competitively, or that was just your goal?
No, that was my goal. I did not play competitively. I played with some pros occasionally, and I would never be able to hack it. Never, not even close.
Jacob, where were you? What were you, like 13? Jacob, you must have been a child.
Well, if it was 10 years ago, so I was 18. I had, so my first, but I started gaming kind of late in life, or like, I played a lot of Flash games as a kid. You know, I was very like online, but Nintendo Wii was my first console. And then I saved up and bought a PS3. And when I bought a PS3, the two games that I started with were Uncharted 2 and Borderlands, which is another interestingly, like, maybe those two games have defined where gaming has gone in the past like 15 years, because it's like a lot of games are Borderlands and a lot of games are Uncharted now. And so I was, pretty quickly I was converted to a Naughty Dog fan, because playing Uncharted 2, I was like, I certainly have never seen anything that looks like this. Like that was very exciting for me. And so I was very hotly looking forward to the release of The Last of Us. I wanted it to be a big art game. Like I really hoped that it would be this kind of whatever. And something that we can talk about briefly is like Naughty Dog was really selling this as a thematic departure. Like their early trailers for it are like, there's one where it has like a Troy Baker monologue about how like the world used to be different over like stock footage of cities, which is in at that time a pretty interesting like approach to marketing. There is, and Blake, I know we messaged about this earlier, there was this like an E3 demo for this game that is still, I think, one of the most compelling on-stage demos I've ever seen.
One of the wildest final shots in an E3 demo too. Like
it is this thing that we have talked about, which is, it's weird that video game trailers just have the most gratuitous violence you've ever seen, and people are like, cool, this is marketing.
Violence.
But it's a demo where it's a section that basically exists in the game, where Joel and Ellie are making it through, I guess, somewhere in Boston, or it's like a hotel or something, and you see a lot of the really impressive thing about it is like you see a lot of enemy AI behavior. You see like enemies sneak up on Joel and hit him. There is a moment where Joel aims at someone and pulls the trigger, and you can hear that the gun is empty, and the enemy hears that the gun is empty. There's a thing where Joel's about to be attacked, and Ellie jumps on someone's back, and it's like, oh my gosh, your allies are smart. And then, as Blake mentioned, the end of this trailer is Joel and this guy are wrestling with a shotgun held in between them. Joel wrestles the shotgun away from him, and then the last shot is Joel just shoots him point blank in the face with a shotgun, and you kind of see his head start to explode, and then it cuts to black, which is
one crucial moment right before it happens, the guy looks up at Joel and begs for his life. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, and so it is this, it is doing the thing that the game, does kind of put a lot of effort into, which is like making the enemies seem human, and then seeing this, pretty calloused act from Joel is like, it effectively sets the tone for the game. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens in that demo that is a little more magical than would actually happen in the game, but like as a tone piece, it set the tone pretty well. And me seeing that at 16 or whatever, because it is 2 years before the game came out, I was hooked. I kind of couldn't get that demo out of my head. I have a
really pathetic story about me coming to The Last of Us, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah.
I was a really big Naughty Dog fan up to this point. I remember watching the Uncharted 2 E3 demo at my grandpa's house on XPlay and being like, man,
what is
it's
the
the
demo
building
for
that falls while you're
where
inside
in the game?
And I was like, oh my
moment.
God, video games have come a long damn way since Pac-Man. So I was a huge Uncharted fan. And crucially, I was a big God of War fan. The early incarnations of them, of course. And God of War Ascension had come out. Great game. Doesn't matter what anyone else says. That's a really good God of War. And they advertised they had a Last of Us demo on it, but I believe the demo did not come. It like took a week or two for the demo to go live. But if you bought the game,
you got like a code for it.
And I remember I was in a band at this point, and we were leaving for tour. And not to sound cool, it was not a good tour. It was not a good band. If we were supposed to play 20 shows on that tour, I think we literally played 6, and the other 14 just like did not exist. It was terrible. But this is very important to this story. So the day that demo went live was the night of our tour kickoff show in Louisville. So the next morning I was going to be leaving for about 3 to 4 weeks. And so I remember like the code was not working, and me and my friend Brent, who was staying with me that played in the band, we were like refreshing the PlayStation 3 store over and over. I'm sure it took forever because we were on like Kentucky Burger King Wi-Fi effectively trying to get this thing to load. Loaded, we played it. We were like, this is crazy. So good. I had already had the game pre-ordered, but it was going to come out while I was gone. So we're on this tour, and it's terrible. The band is in the midst of breaking up. I am in the midst of, starting the path I would have to take into rehab several years later on this tour. It's a nightmare. We end up in Florida and effectively get stranded. Like, we just have to, like, the tour should have happened, and instead we're, like, stuck in Florida for a week and a half. And it's terrible. No one is having a good time. Everything is falling apart. My dad goes to GameStop for me to pick up my pre-order, sends me a picture, and he's like, I got it. And I was like, cool. And that became this, like, bastion of hope that I would make it home to something good in my life again. And I would look at that picture on my old little phone. It wasn't even a smartphone. But so, it was probably like 120p photo or whatever of The Last of Us. I think with my dog Rascal at the time. And I would just stare at that all day to be like,
This is essentially like Joel gazing at pictures of what the world used to be, being like, one day.
I was like, I was just living a totally reckless life at that point. Just being like, this band, I thought it was going to, take me around the world for whatever reason, because I was 18 and stupid. And that band was terrible. So that was never going to happen. But nevertheless, it was ending before my eyes. So I would just look at this picture of my PS3 copy of The Last of Us back home in Louisville and be like, it's all going to be okay one day. And I got home and I played it. It was fucking awesome. I loved that game.
Yeah, so so when you played it, it was like, this was good.
Better than I ever could have expected. I was like, hell yeah. And then the band broke up like the next day, and that was really hard on me. But I still had The Last of Us. And I
was just gonna say, you still have The Last of Us. That will be with you forever, Blake. You can't. No one can take that away from you.
I was oh my god, I was so into this game. I remember my girlfriend at the time. God bless her, wherever she is in this world these days. I would make her watch the cutscenes of The Last of Us and be like, you don't understand. Games are art now. And she'd be like, all right, that's great. Well, when they make it into an HBO show, I'll watch it. But that's my memory of The Last of Us coming out.
I bet she watched the show and was like, I remember
having to sit through ugly cutscenes of this game 10 years ago. Yeah. But, yeah, that's my story about that fucking game.
That is it. That is a great story, and I do think accurately sums up, it's like, it is, I feel like it's rare for people to be, before something comes out, be like, this is going to be huge, and then it comes out, and it is, that it did kind of live up to all those expectations.
In retrospect, really have regretted reviewing The Last of Us Part 1 and, like, not coming out hot on it, because, like, The Last of Us has occupied, and it still occupies, like, a pretty special place in my heart, because of, like, the story attached to it. And also just, like, I really loved that game. Like, I was 19 when it came out. And that game, like, for a 19-year-old, that game hit so hard. Especially in 2013, when, like, you're not used to games like that. That I've been kind of bummed that I played the remake and ultimately, like, did not enjoy it. And couldn't, like, recapture that experience.
So talk a little about, like, what you were hoping to find, or that kind of soured for the second playthrough, or whatever playthrough it was.
And I had replayed the game at least one, but it was probably only like a year or two later when the remaster came out. So even then, the last time I had played it in full would have been like 8 years. And I think who I was at 19 and who I am at 28, 29 was so different in terms of, like, the kind of art I enjoy and the stories I like am attracted to, and, like, things like this, that I found the writing. I still think the story's interesting and good, and I like the setup of the road trip and Joel and Ellie, and I think there's a lot of really solid work there. I guess I kind of had forgotten the part, or just was not as seasoned enough at that point to kind of see the ways that I think Druckmann was finding himself as a writer. Clearly at that time he was very talented. I still think he is a talented writer for all his faults and flaws.
Also, I do have to interrupt you to just say I was watching that Grounded documentary, which is, there's a documentary on making it. Druckmann was like 32 when directing the game, which is a wild thing to think about, being close to the age I am now, like, controlling that number of people. And also, Bruce Straley also directed this game, which is a weird thing that has kind of Druckmann has essentially assumed ownership of the
Yeah.
Last of Us franchise, where he co-directed this. There was another guy, and obviously there were hundreds of other people who worked at Naughty Dog who also made the games. Not just him.
From a 1,000-yard view, there seems to be some bad blood there that no one is addressing directly, which I find pretty interesting. But I think going back to it, I maybe just didn't know at the time that like Druckmann was really trying to find his voice. And I think for all the like ways that game clearly stood out narratively as like just leagues better than its contemporaries, when I revisited it, I did not find it as I guess profound as I did at 2019. I found it like people like to say it's the greatest story in games ever told. I found it I know it's kind of reductive to say, I found it like a kind of mediocre prestige television show. And I think part of that comes from, like, I do really love The Last of Us Part 2. I think I'm kind of scared to revisit it right now. But I think it just, it's operator error too, right? It's never going to hit the way it did for a 19-year-old. And, like, maybe if I had never played the game before, I would come to it the way Nicole did, like, divorced from all those expectations. And I wouldn't have been as cynical about it. But I think just, like, for whatever reason, when I went back to it, like, I was trying to recapture a glory that just did not exist, and I could only see its faults. And its faults don't have to be the defining thing about the game, but, like, it was all I could see in the moment, which, like, has really bummed me out in the last year. That it's like, I am like, it's now, my memory of it is tainted because of that. And it's like, it's still important to me, but it's like, I always look back as like, what a special game, and also I didn't enjoy it last time, and that fucking sucks. You know?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It is. I'm terrified to play The Last of Us Part 2 because that was a pretty impactful game on me when it came out. So
you wanted this season so bad.
Look, we all got big talk till it's time to walk the walk, and now I'm scared. So, Jacob, have you revisited it at all?
I feel like I've been in a constant state of revisiting it since 2013 because people never stop talking about this game. But the last time I played through it would have been a long time ago. I mean, I played Left Behind, the DLC, not when it released, maybe a year or two after that. And so that was kind of, I think I replayed the whole game and then replayed Left Behind at that point. And I think, Blake, did you mention this in your review? That like Left Behind is still probably the best
I
part of it?
wanted to add, because I forgot, I still think Left Behind is like fantastic. Like, I think...
And Nicole, you were nodding vigorously.
Oh, God. I was like, what the heck?
Exactly.
How did I miss this? Like, this is... Like, how did I not play this until now? That's what that was my feeling when I played Left Behind.
Yes. But I think, it was like, I haven't actually gone back to... I think I've played the opening hours several times, but have not committed to playing through the whole game again. Just because. But I do think, like, as we talked about in the beginning, there were several discourses, some of which happened immediately upon the game's release, and some which kind of grew. The dadification thing was, I feel like when we talk about that, we talk about like Kratos. But that was in 2018, and this was, I think, the three main ones were The Last of Us, BioShock Infinite, and the Walking Dead Telltale game were all games about gruff men escorting not their daughter across some hostile
this
territory.
might be a bad take, but I think a better dad game than all of those is actually Michael and GTA 5 trying to figure out how to be a parent of genuinely terrible children. I think that's a really interesting plot point in that game.
Yeah, the problem is they made all the kids too good in these games.
Like, you usually see, usually the dad is the problem in these, and in GTA 5 it's kind of like, no, it's actually his son is the problem. He just sucks. More games should be about shitty children, actually.
And so there's this dad narrative, and I think something that we have kind of come to recognize, it was so explicit with God of War that it was really hard to ignore, was the, like, game developers becoming fathers and then being like, oh no, what if I'm a bad dad? What if I'm spending all my time making a video game? I should make my game about that.
Really, the 2005 God of War was the first sad dad game. Like that was what that
he is
no,
the
I mean, like
saddest
literally
dad.
that is what David Jaffe was writing that game about. It's like I spend too much time at work. So, you know, it all goes back to Jaffe. It always does. That freaking moron.
Nicole, did you have how did you experience the kind of the dad part, and maybe also the the patriarchal themes that are kind of like inherent in that kind of theme?
Yeah, and I came into the game knowing about that this, like I mentioned before, that like this was a game about a dad and not his daughter on this journey. And I think that the distance from the, period of sad dad games that came out did help my like experience playing The Last of Us Part 1, because I wasn't like inundated with these sad dad games. And so I do think that helped me have like I didn't have the experience like, oh my god, every single game is made by this guy who is turning 34 and like doesn't know how to take care of his daughter. So I think that definitely helped the experience. But at times, like I did feel that the patriarchal overtones, like you mentioned, of that sort of relationship, and also just the general idea that that so many games are about, or where you're playing as this white sad gruff dude. Like even outside of like being a parent or having that parental experience, like it's still a game that has an experience that is like so well trodden in games. You see that so much. One thing that stood out to me about this game, though, when I looked back at it, I watched some clips of the graphics, the footage there, and one thing I think that they improved on so much, and I think that helped them create better female characters, is that they like upgraded the models that they used. I think that in The Last of Us Part 1, like the original, all of the women had the same face, literally the same, like, and even Ellie, like she's a kid, like they tried to make her like kind of like a hot, every woman in that game had a hot girl face. And,
yeah, it's when you look at them next to each other, it's like Ellie looks like a cartoon in the original. Like her eyes are so big, which is good for her being expressive, but it's like, yeah, she doesn't look like a real person.
No, and all of the women, literally, you could take their hair and their like body away, and they all had the same face. And in this game, they did such a good job making the women characters feel like they actually had their own models, and that like they put in the work to differentiate characters in a way that like when I looked back at the footage, I was like, they're literally the same exact face. Like you copied and pasted that face.
It's interesting watching. I mean, thinking back to kind of what I remember and like watching the Grounded documentary, where like for the time there was a lot of stuff. I mean, for someone who was like a feminist on Tumblr in 2013 or whatever, like there was stuff that was exciting about this, that it got very publicized, that like Naughty Dog found out that they hadn't had any women QA testers, and so they like went back and they were like, no, this needs to be tested with women. And I thought, oh, that's good. And there were in Grounded, there's a funny section where very clearly the interviewer asked, what do you think about strong women characters? And then they have like all of the women in the game being like, I think it's good to have strong women. But there is a lot to say. I mean, like Ashley Johnson talks a lot about how she's not playing kind of the typical video game lady of this time who is like sexy and has no internal anything, and Blake and I are have just finished playing through No More Heroes, which is a game that has a lot of that. So it's like, she's not wrong. The video games have not done well with women, and still
pretty famously, I think Sony was pushing them on the original key art to put Joel up front and center, and Naughty Dog had to push way back to get Ellie up front and center. And I think their argument was like, she is the main character, which is more or less true, but also was like, we're trying to buck this trend where it's like let's put the woman up front in the game. I think they talk about that in Grounded. Also, really quick, Grounded is on YouTube at this point for free, I believe. It also comes with like all the new copies. It's like a Sony like created thing, so it doesn't go into all the parts of game development you want it to, but I think for like a first party documentary, it's worth seeking out. It's an interesting time capsule of like Naughty Dog and video games at that point, and it's like it's cool. Yeah, it's like feature length too. It's like an hour and a half.
It is, yeah, essentially the prototype for like the God of War one that they did a couple years ago. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched a lot of that last night. You won't find something that the God of War documentary has, that this one does not at all, is any discussion of it being hard. And it's like Naughty Dog is a studio that around The Last of Us Part 2 became very famous for crunch, for kind of like poor employee experiences. This game famously had like a ton of it thrown away. They kind of got to a point in development and decided that it wasn't working, and they tossed it out and started again, which, hard to argue that the game didn't probably benefit from it, but it's like that does not happen while maintaining normal work weeks and whatever. So it's like there's not much writing about what it was like making The Last of Us 1, at least as far as I've been able to find. But from everything we know about video game development, like, crunch ain't a new thing, and if they were doing this so hard on The Last of Us Part 2, it is almost a certainty that they were doing it here.
I'm tired of the modern world, Jacob.
Oh, I can't wait to hear where this is going.
Everything is just like designed to be cheap and break after one use. It's all plastic, and it all just kind of sucks, and I just end up throwing it away. Except for this one thing.
Blake, if this is about Gundams...
Except for these two things. I'm talking about my Henson Razor, Jacob, the sponsor of this podcast. See, unlike everything else in my life, this is solid. It's metal. It's designed to stick around. And here's the wildest thing. Henson Shaving is also an aerospace parts manufacturer. I didn't know that until reading this right now. They're making and engineering their razors with the same kind of quality and precision. Do you know about the diving board problem, Jacob?
I absolutely do not.
So, all right, hear me out. So razor blades are like diving boards. If they stick out further, they wiggle more. And this wiggle is what causes cuts and razor burn and all that stuff you don't want on your face or other parts. But Henson razors are so engineered they only stick out 0.0013 inches, which means the blade doesn't wiggle at all, and so the shave is super smooth. The thing is like the stiffest diving board ever. This analogy, it works.
That's good. You're telling me it's good.
It's good! You can get one of these razors, which is also long-term and affordable and a sustainable way to shave, with a free box of blades by going to hensonshaving.com and using the promo code ROTTEN. Hey, free box of blades. That's pretty rotten, huh?
Blake, I have to tell you, I was just kidding about all those questions I asked. I have a Henson razor, and I love it. It's so nice. hensonshaving.com, promo code ROTTEN.
I have a big question. Well, let's leave it to AAA only. But is The Last of Us 1 the greatest story ever told in video games? I don't mean that too cynically, because I think my answer, despite my negative feelings about it, would still be like, yeah, kind of. One of them, at least. Like, I think it's worth talking about in, like, the context of when it came out and all the games that came out later that were trying to, like, steal a little piece of its pie. Nicole, I'm super interested in you coming to it 10 years later as well.
Yeah, I think that coming to it like 10 years later, like we've seen a lot of growth in storytelling. I don't know about I'm sure there was growth in the AAA space, but like there are so many really, really well told stories elsewhere as well. So that I didn't come into The Last of Us thinking like this is the greatest story ever told. Like it didn't feel as influential, I think, as it probably did when it came out, because like I think that at that time you didn't see stories like that. So and I think you can see the influence of The Last of Us in video games that happened after that as well. And that obviously it didn't happen. It would never happen now because it's the game that's been released 3 times.
There is that question of just like what is AAA. Obviously, I think Shadow of the Colossus has a better story than this. You know, I think Silent Hill 2 has a better story than this. Video games used to cost less, and so it's like Silent Hill 2 was a AAA game for the PlayStation 2, but that distinction of like what AAA means is very different than what it meant when it was coming out for
I think it's an interesting question. Like, I'm not trying to create a farce here, because like that is the way the game is talked about still 10 years later. So it's like, is that true? Do we think it's true? I think probably. I think we can all agree Yakuza 0 is the greatest story of video games ever told. But I think The Last of Us Part 1 is like, it has probably earned that through some degree just by being like pretty fucking good, and most video game stories being pretty fucking bad. It is like, it has created, sorry, Jacob. I think it has at least created an attempt at better storytelling. Whether or not anyone has necessarily achieved that is up for personal debate. But I do think it at least like created this moment where people are like, we should maybe start taking things more seriously, which discounts a lot of like great stories and other video games that came before.
I mean, it's, you know, it's like BioShock came out 4 years.
But I think
that's
in a similar
you know,
place, right? Like, I think BioShock paves the way to Last of Us, and The Last of Us paves the way to like whatever games come after. Like,
yeah, I guess what my frustration with The Last of Us, and it's like it's hard for me to talk about it divorced from what it means in the games industry, is like, I kind of think that it is the clearest inflection point for me of like, we just need to start spending as much money as we possibly can on the graphics. Like, that's what this game is to me. And it's like, I agree that watching those cutscenes at that time felt unbelievable, you know, and still I think the strongest part of the game are the character performances. I think the actors do a good job. I think the animators did an exceptional job animating them. But it is this good story by kind of presentation versus good story by, because it's just like, I think the plot beats are interesting. I don't think they're not, but I don't think the game works if you don't have as much money as you do going into what the faces look like. And I think that's kind of what makes it the greatest story, because it's just like The Last of Us as a text adventure, you're just going to notice all of the things even more clearly that were already issues with the story when the game came out. But I do think, I don't think it's a ridiculous question, and there certainly are many, many people who would still say, yes, you know, that like this was, as you said, like this was the moment when people started kind of
I don't know if this is gonna make sense. I don't necessarily mean my question in like an overtly positive sense, but like also the cynicism of it being one of the greatest stories ever told in video games does get us to things like video games now just have to cost $300 million and all hit like the same narrative beats of The Last of Us. Like, I also mean the question in a cynical way, where we get something like Days Gone, right? Or we get like parts of games where you have to push up and walk as the game just talks at you for a while. Does that make sense? Am I making any
describing Dear Esther? And I love that game.
Am I making any sense, or am I just like talking out of my ass?
Yeah, no, it holds the cultural place as the greatest game ever. You know, I think we will talk about this more as time as the series goes on. You know, immediately there was a kind of criticism about like fridging in the game, that like Joel immediately has an important woman in his life killed, not his wife like Max Payne, but his daughter, and it's the kind of like death of a girl to motivate the main character.
Hold on, Max Payne also had a daughter that got killed. Let's not forget the lore.
Yeah, he double fridged.
Let's not forget about Max Payne 1. Okay, his daughter also died.
That's right. I think more novel to me, just because it did not happen at the same time as the game's release, is there has since been a lot of literature talking about the use of or kind of denial or whatever of race in this game, because The Last of Us is very cognizant of like gender politics. You know, a lot of the game is like, hey, how is it different being a woman in this world? You know, how is Ellie's experience different than Joel? How is Tess's experience different than Joel? All of that. It is pretty much race blind in the text, where you could read the characters, and if you did not see them, you would not necessarily know that they were any race at all. However, The Last of Us is a series that many times will kill a black character horribly and then just immediately cut to black is like a thing that happens weirdly over and over in this series. It happens in this game with Sam and Henry and Marlene, and we don't see her die, but what's
Riley.
Ellie's Riley, all of them. And as Cameron wrote about in his book, it is this kind of like using the cinematic language of like to cut to black, essentially meaning like as soon as they're dead, their character stops existing at all, and their only purpose is to like motivate the white characters who keep doing things, which as a 17-year-old playing this game, I did not think about at all, but now I find a really fascinating kind of like approach to talking about this game, and just the ways that it is like post-apocalypse, society is dead, but it is still kind of replicating all of these societal problems that we do have now in our present world.
Can you tell people what the name of Cameron's book is? I don't think we've actually mentioned it.
Cameron's book is called, his book is called The World is Born from Zero. Specifically, he has a chapter called Anti-Blackness and the Aesthetic Grounding of Speculation that he writes about this a lot. And there are also, let me just find, Treyandria Roosworm has also written about this a lot in a piece called Dystopian Blackness. We will talk about this more as the series goes on, but I just kind of want to introduce it now because it is, it's a lens that I find really interesting to look at these through, especially given how I didn't see it at all in, the first 5 years of this game's release.
Should we wrap it up? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, Nicole, we don't want to spoil things, but you have played The Last of Us Part 2. Do you want to, I guess, what were you hoping for after playing Part 1? First of all, did you want a sequel? Because when I played it and saw there was Part 2, I thought, I don't want more of that story. They nailed it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I felt. I thought, and what I liked most about it is that it was this very contained story, and it worked like that, and that it didn't need a sequel. So when I played The Last of Us Part 2, I said this before we started recording, but I was shocked by how much I hated it, because of the length. I think that they did something so special with The Last of Us in creating that really focused story that coming to this was like, I got to, I don't know how to talk about this without spoiling it, but I got to like the first part where I thought the game was going to end, and it was like double that and more after.
Double and a third, basically.
Yeah, I was similarly playing it while my husband was watching it with me, and we were like, it was like, I don't know, like 12 p.m., like definitely past my bedtime. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep playing despite that, even though I'm very tired. I'm going to be, I'm like in my mid-30s. I'm going to be very tired and feel very horrible tomorrow for staying up too late. And I was like, yeah, but I'll be able to finish it tonight. It's like, no, it lasted like, I kept playing until like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to stop because I was like, oh, this game's like actually not going to end for like a dozen more hours, maybe.
It is I would say egregiously at best, criminally at worst, too long, despite how much I like it. It's obscene.
Yeah, I just got totally disinterested after like that first part where I thought
that's fair. Yeah.
Something that we should talk about before the ending of this podcast is the ending of the game, because this is still kind of the thing that like I think if it had ended a different way, people would not talk about this game 10 years later as much as they do. And so, Nicole, when you beat it, what was your kind of like, I don't know, it feels so simple to be like, what was your read on the situation? But like, what were you kind of thinking in terms of like this is what it means for the characters with that final Joel hospital sequence, and then Ellie's kind of like questioning him at the end.
Yeah, I think I thought it was an interesting ending, of course. Like, and I totally agree that if it was different, people wouldn't have talked about this. It was a really impactful ending. I think that the series creators have like talked about it being a move that was based in love. Love for Ellie, Joel's love for Ellie, whatever. And I didn't experience that at all. I was kind of like struck by the intense trauma and grief of Joel's entire life that brought him to make that decision, and that like the idea of it being driven by, you know, maybe it was driven by love, but like I just felt like so much of that decision was like based in trauma and the trauma of his life up until that point. So I was very struck by that. I thought that was really, really interesting. And to leave it at a cliffhanger like that, we're like, oh god, like we don't need a sequel, but we're definitely going to get one. And I think Jacob, you were talking about this before, that one of the parts was that it was so clear in the game that this was Joel taking Ellie's agency away. And that was like, okay, that this game is acknowledging that was very, very interesting, and like very it was surprising to me.
Blake, how'd you feel
about the ending of the original game? That was awesome.
Yeah.
I said, hey, that's how
done and dusted.
I said, hey, that's how the road ended. That's pretty cool. It's not true. I saw the road after The Last of Us. No, I thought it was cool. I don't know. I think I still think it works as a pretty bold choice to just because it's unsatisfying, right? And I think that's what that for the same reason a lot of people really love that ending. I think an equal number of people are really kind of put off by that ending because it like makes an active choice to not be satisfying. You are kind of left with a pit in your stomach, feeling a little queasy about Joel's actions. You know, the kind of like this dilemma games face all the time about whether they should give players agency or not in key moments of the game. Like, this game is uninterested in that. Joel is going to, even if you don't make the choice to be a murderer in the last moment, you still, you know, rob Ellie of her autonomy in what she wanted in that moment. I thought I was really interested in when I first came to it, and I still like appreciate now as like kind of the bold choice to, at the 11th hour, recontextualize that story to be like, don't get it twisted, Joel was kind of the bad guy here. And one of the one of the flaws I think of like a lot of readings of this game is Joel is the hero, when I think it's like, especially by the time you get to The Last of Us Part 2, which like is in its opening hours, if not through the entire runtime, about reckoning with Joel's actions as the villain of definitely some people's stories. I think it was an interesting choice in that first game to be like, yeah, you kind of were playing the bad guy the whole time.
Yeah, this series it almost feels like people's attachment to Joel breaks this series.
Yeah.
You know, like the inability of people to kind of step outside their affection for him as a character, or their connection to him, is like I'm sure I will say this many more times on this podcast. Rarely does a take frustrate me more than they wouldn't have been able to make a cure anyway.
Right.
Reading of
like,
this game, which is
what are we doing here? Like,
shockingly
it's fiction.
Popular. Yeah, because it's just like, well, then the story like has no emotional arc. You know, like then it means nothing. And obviously, Joel thought it would. You know, Joel did not make the decision that he made because he thought they would never have been able to make a cure, and he literally says that in the second game. But it's like, it is this interesting moment where it like, it's asking you to do something, and I think one of the reasons that it's so like weirdly contentious is like people are just so attached to Joel that they like almost can't experience the plot point maybe as it was intended, which I find really interesting in terms of the experience that like people have with art, but very frustrating as someone who like values readings of stories.
Right. Well, it's like it speaks to a broader issue with media literacy around games, right? Like where it's a fundamental misunderstanding that it's wrong that Ellie was denied autonomy, and yet there's a huge contingent of this fan base that believes Ellie should have been robbed of autonomy in that moment, which is like, well, why were you playing what were you thinking the entire time you were playing the game? Like, it's such a bizarre, like, way to look at the game that seems to, like, completely misread the text. And I think I don't know how much of that you want to fault of the game itself versus the audience, like if it's 50-50 or 100% weighted towards one way, but it is like very strange that like a lot of people just cannot see kind of a very blatant point at the end of that game.
Yeah, and it is something that we are going to talk about way more with The Last of Us Part 2, probably.
Yeah.
But that will be for the following episodes of this show. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us on us setting off on this journey. Blake and I both really loved your Last of Us Part 1 review, and I think if you've listened to this and haven't read it, go read that.
It'll be in the description.
Anything else? Yeah, anything else you want to plug? Talk about your work. You're a really good investigative journalist, as well as someone who writes about video games as reviews.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. My Twitter, which is maybe not as relevant now, is at Sweet Potatoes. Mm-hmm. Let's see. The other thing that I can say about The Last of Us to close out my thoughts is that when my mom came into watching the TV show, after the first episode, she was like, wow, this TV show is so great. I'm so glad that there's going to be a cure eventually. And I was like, oh.
Oh, no.
Oh. Oh, no. But yeah.
No.
Nicole, actually, I have a final question.
Okay.
Does it feel cool to have at Sweet Potatoes? I've always seen that and thought, like, damn, that's a cool tag.
Yeah. So I made that tag when I got my my Xbox 360. It's been my gamer tag since I got that. Wow. So I just made it my Twitter handle at that time. I get a lot of messages and like notifications at Thanksgiving time. A lot, actually.
Where people are just like, shout out at Sweet Potatoes. You're the greatest.
Yeah, and like thinking like they're tagging Sweet Potatoes, like, love my Thanksgiving sweet potato casserole. It's so good. So yum, yum, yum. Yeah, but actually recently I got tagged in like someone talking about sweet potatoes and like their health benefits. So I like learn a little bit through having that tag.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, devastated that I'll never get it on any other platform.
Well, thank you for coming on Something Rotten.
Yep.
That'll do us for this episode. Blake, Hester, and I, we're just gonna find a reason to keep on going, and that's what you got to do, right?
Okay. It's like the ending of the game. That was the joke there.
Good. Oh, like the road?
Yeah, kind of like the ending of the road.